Before we get started in the Dharma talk, please join me in invoking the Buddha's name 3 times. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Good evening, everyone. We are continuing our discussion on the Amitabha Sutra, the shorter Sukhavati Vyuha Sutra that we've been discussing for the past couple of months. So I've started off on the discussion on sutras in general, the types of sutras, the significance of the Amitabha Sutra in particular, since it's one of the main sutras of our tradition that we chant during evening ceremonies. So for the past few weeks, Anagarika, Quang has been covering essentially the first paragraph of the sutra, which introduces the 16 arhats and a few of the bodhisattvas that are in the assembly of when this sutra was given. So Quang has been covering that for us, and he's almost halfway through the list of arhats. So today he'll be covering 3 more arhats for us. So we're still pretty early into the sutra, even though we're months in, but the discussion of the background of the arhats, to me at least, is important for our practice, important for our study in general. That way we get to know the different arhats, get to know who they are, their story, how they became introduced to the Buddha or the Dharma, and how they became enlightened. Since a lot of these arhats are mentioned in the majority of our sutras, right? Especially the prominent, at least the main 10 disciples of the Buddha are almost always mentioned in the majority of sutras. And so it's just important to know who they are, how they came to be, and just kind of essentially get to know them. That way, as we continue to practice other sutras or to read other sutras, or just to practice in general in our studies, when we come in contact with these different arhats and bodhisattvas, we know who they are, we can recognize their name, we can recognize their story. That way in the future, if anyone would be discussing a sutra or discussing the Dharma, that they know some background of these arhats, of these bodhisattvas, just to add to their practice. So I will go ahead and give Anagarika Quang the floor, and he will continue the discussion on the arhats.
Good evening, everyone. As Taekwang Tree said, I have covered the first 7 arhats. Today I will cover 3 more of them. Today we'll be covering 3 nandas, but each one of them is different and each one has a different story. So the first one I will go over today is Nanda, who is different from Sundarananda, who is the Buddha's little brother, and is different from Ananda, who is the Buddha's first cousin. Nanda itself means bliss, and this Nanda lived as a cowherder and decided to ordain under the Buddha after hearing what was called the 11 matters of tending cows. And this was an analogy for cultivating the way. So where this is interesting because we often hear that the Buddha, he changed his practice or he changed his teachings depending on who he was talking to, whether he was talking with royalty and wise men, or if he was talking with poor classes of people, or even some middle-class people. He had a different sutra for different kinds of people. And this kind of shows one of those, to where if you read something like the debate of King Melinda, it's with an enlightened being talking with a king, so they're talking over kingly matters. And because the king was highly educated, they were able to go back and forth about more difficult and complex topics, to where this sutra itself is meant for people tending to cows or cow herders, so thus the name 8 Matters of Attending to Cows. And in this sutra, the Buddha goes over 11 of those matters. The first one is knowing the cow's form. Second one is skilled in characteristics. Then picking out flies' eggs. 4 is dressing the wounds. 5 is smokes out pests. 6 is knows the ford. 7 is knows satisfaction. 8 knows the trail. 9 is skilled in pastures. 10 doesn't milk the cow dry. And 11 shows extra respect to the bulls, who are fathers and the leaders of the herd. So you can kind of see that the cow herders, these are things that they know about. These are things that they do on a daily basis. And the Buddha can use these tasks to represent them as analogies for cultivating the way, or practicing and living the Dharma. So where the first one, knowing the form, this is an analogy for truly knowing that all form is made up of or derived of the 4 elements, to where we've talked about this in a meditation class before. This is contemplating the 4 elements, the 4 elements being water, fire, earth, and air. To where water itself represents really everything in this world. All living beings need water to survive. There's a large amount of water on earth, and this is something that every living being needs. Next is fire. You can see fire just by stepping outside. Under the sun's rays, through that combustion process, it gives off heat through the cosmos, comes to earth, and really gives life to all sentient and insentient beings. Thus, one of those insentient beings are trees in the plant life. They need that fire, they need that sunlight to survive. And thus that kind of goes into what earth is. Earth is another one of the 4 elements, and that represents the plants. And if you think about it, everyone eats plants, or for the most part eats plants, and if they don't, they're meat eaters. And even those cows, those pigs, those chickens, they're all feeding off of some earthly food, and most likely plants like grain and corn. So those kind of feed into each other. And then the last element is air, which, as far as I know, all sentient beings here need a source of air. But then it goes into, I guess you can go more scientific with it. Not in air, there's oxygen, but there's also nitrogen, carbon, and hydrogen. And then from, I guess, a scientific point of view, those 4 elements, which you can think about as Chan, C for carbon, H for hydrogen, O for oxygen, N for nitrogen. Those 4 basic elements make up really all form in the universe. And without any of these elements present, the body and form could not exist on Earth. Life itself could not exist without any one of these 4 elements, because they all kind of work with each other to bring life to light, pretty much. This is also meant to show the interconnectedness between all things, that nothing inherently exists on its own. And this is the analogy to where knowing the cow's form, which is a little silly, but to know what a cow looks like and how to care for that cow. Second one is skilled in characteristics. And by this, it means that one understands characteristics of a lot of different kinds of people. So say, able to recognize fools and able to recognize wise people. And this is, you're able to recognize them by their deeds, by their thoughts, by their motives, by their actions. So when you see a man performing good deeds, if you see a woman acting good towards people, you can assume that these are wise and good people, whereas the fool is performing foolish actions, which is making a mockery of other people. So it's skilled in these characteristics at looking at people. This also kind of shows the effects of karma, to where if you perform some bad action in a previous lifetime, it kind of carries on with you to the next lifetime. And whether it be a punishment or if it be a reward, it's able to see the cause and effect of karma. This is similar to knowing whether if a cow was a good cow or if a cow was a lame cow for your herd. The third, which was picking out the fly's eggs. This is to represent a person who is not tolerant of sensual, malicious, or cruel thoughts that arise within them. And once these thoughts are noticed, they're quickly discarded, or you could say they're exterminated like flies' eggs. And when they get rid of the eggs, they get rid of everything else that comes afterwards. So with the thoughts, they could lead to speech, and then that speech could lead to action, which is the analogy of you have the fly's egg, which is the thought, you have the larva, which is the speech, and you have the fly itself, which is the action. So it's stopping things at the egg, which is stopping those cruel or nasty thoughts from arising. You stop this whole process of unwholesome deeds. And going along with that analogy, if you let the fly eggs hatch, your cows may become sick, they may become diseased, and it could ultimately lead to the death of the cow. The fourth one is dressing wounds. This is to realize that the person is not attached to any of the six senses, which are sight, sound, taste, touch, smell, and mind. And by this, by not being attached, is that they're able to experience something and immediately let it go. So say you're going on a walk and you see a beautiful flower. You're able to see a beautiful flower and just realize and just see it and experience it for what it is. You're not picking the flower, because as soon as you pick the flower, it immediately starts to die. You kind of cut it off from its life source. And when you pull it away, it just kind of withers. But because of your attachment to that flower, you've caused that decay in that flower. And then going along with the analogy, dressing the wounds. Dressing the wounds is recognizing those thoughts and restraining yourself from clinging to something. And when you recognize this wound, you're able to better let that heal. You're able to let it. You're able to care for it better. To where the longer you cling to phenomena, the longer you cling to an experience, the longer that wound festers, and it becomes harder and harder to clean afterwards. This can also go for, say, relationships you have with people, or if you develop any sort of negative addiction, especially with relationships with people that aren't really great for your life. As you get deeper and deeper to those relationships, it gets harder and harder to get away from them. Same thing with addiction. As you get deeper and deeper into your addictions, it's harder and harder to get out of them. Thus, the analogy goes, those wounds start to fester more and more, and it gets harder and harder to clean them. So if you're able to cut off the clinging at the source, you're able to go and bandage those wounds as they arise on your cow. The fifth one is to smoke out pests, and this is to teach the Dharma in detail as you've learned it and as you've memorized it. And it's more to keep the Dharma authentic and to not twist it to suit your needs or to twist it to your own taste, but to represent it in its authentic form, free from any sort of biases. And the reason why you do this is so the person that you're teaching this to, you're not biasing the person. You're able to dispel any doubts they have, with those doubts being pests. As you start to smoke out the pests, as you start to teach the Dharma the way it's supposed to be taught, you're able to get these pests and doubts out of the person's mind. 6 is knowing the ford. And this is the analogy of knowing the limitations when learning the Dharma. If you don't understand something, you don't have the arrogance to not go seek help. You're able to realize this isn't something that I fully understand. So you're willing to go out to someone, you'll find a senior monastic, or you find a more senior lay member that knows a little more Dharma than you do, and ask them questions, see what they think. And this is just to help yourself out too, because when you have a question about something, you go for clarification. And this goes towards the analogy to where the ford is a stream or a body of water. And someone who knows how to get around the ford, they know how to navigate it well. So they're not constantly running in the rocks, they're not constantly going down the wrong way or running over rocks on the ford. They're able to, traverse down the stream calmly. Seventh one is to know satisfaction. And this means that one finds joy in listening to the Dharma and participating in a lot of these Dharma discussions. And even in the discussions, there could be some debate in there, and you could realize that, some of the things that you thought are not entirely correct. And instead of taking the criticism harshly, or you're able to improve upon yourself and go, I wasn't thinking about that right. This person has the correct view. So you're able to take satisfaction of that, not to look down on yourself and go, oh, I'm just a horrible learner. And this is similar to the cowherd seeing his herd blossom. He sees the cows frolicking through the fields happily, and this inspires him to keep doing what he's doing. Number 8 is knowing the trail. This is a very straightforward analogy. The trail in this case is the Eightfold Path. And when one knows the trail, they're able to practice very diligently. Similar as one knows the trail, they know where to and where not to go down the trail, thus keeping themselves and their herds of cows safe. Number 9 is skilled in pastures. This is to mean that one truly understands the 4 kinds of mindfulness meditations, which we've been going over in our meditation classes. And those 4 are mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of the feelings, mindfulness of the mind, and mindfulness of the mental formations. Just like a cowherder is mindful of their pasture, they know where all the landscape, they know where all their cows graze, they know where the cows are all the time. This is similar to one that knows themselves. They're mindful of their body, they're mindful of their feelings, their mind, and their mental formations. Just like the cowherd knows the landscape and knows the pastures, the practitioner knows themselves. They know their mind. They know the experiences for what they are. Number 10 is that the cowherd doesn't milk the cow dry. This is to mean that when one receives gifts, they don't receive gifts in excess. Such gifts could be clothing, food, shelter, or just general gifts they're accepted in moderation. This is more to ease greediness. It's for someone to realize, I don't really need all this stuff, and to let the gifter know gently that I thank you very much for this, but this is something I don't need right now. This is similar to the cowherd when he milks his cow. He doesn't want to milk the cow dry, because if he were, he could harm the cow, damage it, and really damage the relationship between them and their herd. This is similar to the monastic and their community. If they're always relying on the community and wanting more and more from them, it could seem that the community thinks that they're taking advantage of them. So to milk the cow dry is to damage that relationship between the 2 parties. And then the last matter that the Buddha talks about is to show extra respect for the bulls, who are the fathers and the leaders of the herd. This is similar to respecting the senior members of the Sangha, and even the senior monks too. This is to show kindness and respect for them, because those are the ones that are ultimately guiding all the lay practitioners and all the ones that aren't skilled in the Dharma as they progress down their path. And to show them kindness and respect helps them teach better. This is similar how the bull protects the herd. And I guess that kind of shows that it's not just the cow herder that's helping out the herd. It's the leaders in the herds themselves, because the cow herd can't keep every cow safe all the time. They rely on the bulls who are there to help them. Let's see, where we go. And then, upon Nanda hearing this really resonated with him, and he asked the Buddha to be ordained underneath him, which the Buddha had then accepted. And then it wasn't too long before Nanda had attained the fruit of arhatship. And on one occasion, the Buddha had asked him to preach the Dharma to a group of 500 bhikshunis. Bhikshunis in this case being nuns. And then after the talk he had with the nuns, all 500 of those nuns had become arhats themselves. And it kind of concerned some of the other monks in the community going, what, just after one talk all these nuns became arhats? It seems preposterous. But then the Buddha assured them that these nuns had made a vow back in a previous lifetime that they would attain liberation in a future one. In particular, these 500 nuns had been concubines to a Dharma-protecting king in the past. And this Dharma-protecting king showed great respect and great reverence for the Buddha of his time. So much so that he had made shrines to him, and a lot of people came to give offerings to this shrine. A lot of them were these 500 concubines. And upon giving the offerings, they had made a vow that we vow with our king and our other fellow women that we will soon become liberated in a future lifetime. And that vow stayed with them throughout every lifetime. And I guess this kind of shows the meaning of what a vow can do. As soon as you make a vow towards something, you're dedicated to that. Ultimately, you're wanting to keep up with your practice and ultimately attain what you vow to attain. Even though it may take many lifetimes to do that, or in the case of one lifetime, if you practice diligently, you will attain that goal. So where finally, yes, Ananda was able to enlighten those 500 nuns. So that finishes the story of Nanda. So we'll now go to the second Nanda. This one's name is Sundarananda. This Nanda was the Buddha's little half brother, because when the Buddha's mother died, the king had married her sister. And he had another son with her, and the son was Sundarananda, thus making Sundarananda the Buddha's paternal half-brother. So then it's said that 7 years after the enlightenment of the Buddha, he returned home to his father's palace because his father had missed him dearly and he wanted to see his son. And on one of those days that he was staying with his father and his family, he was having lunch with his half-brother Sundarananda. And they both had eaten together, and then the Buddha had finished his meal, and he gave his bowl to Sundarananda, and he just left the palace. And Sundarananda holding the bowl going, I don't know what the heck the Buddha's doing. This is his bowl. Why would he give this to me and just leave all of a sudden? So in his confusion, he left the palace to go look for the Buddha to give him back his bowl. And he caught the Buddha as he was walking away from the palace. And so Sundarananda chased after him to give him his bowl back. But it seemed that every step that he took, the Buddha got farther and farther away, to where just walking 100 feet felt like miles, to where eventually, yes, he did travel several miles back to the Jeta Grove where the Buddha was staying. And upon getting to the Jeta Grove, he gave the Buddha back his bowl, and the Buddha had asked him, would you like to ordain as a monk underneath me? But Sundarananda was very reluctant at the time. At that time, he was deeply attached to his lover, Sundari, and he was with her all the time. It's all he thought about, to where they were eventually going to become married. And he thought that this wouldn't have been the life for him, but he decided to give it a chance. So reluctantly he accepted, but he wasn't fully committed. And after some time after ordaining, he did feel that deep dissatisfaction with his spiritual life, mostly because he longed for his lover Sundari. So where one day, as that dissatisfaction overcame him, he exclaimed to some monks that, no, I can't do this anymore. I'm deeply upset with what I'm doing now, and my longing is superb. I need to go. I need to leave. I need to disrobe. I need to go see my lover Sundari. So where one of the monks that he was talking to quickly went to the Buddha, he said, I regret to inform you, but your little brother Sundarananda, he would like to leave the monastic life. He would like to go back to being a lay person. And then the Buddha kind of knew that this would happen. He realized that his younger brother was dissatisfied with his monastic life. So before he left the palace, the Buddha had went up to Sundarananda and he asked him, "Before you leave, would you mind going on a walk with me?" He said, "Yeah, I'll go with you." So him and the Buddha had taken a hike to a nearby mountain, and on the mountain they had saw this group of monkeys there. And in observing them, they saw them swinging through the trees, some eating some bananas, some picking some flies out of the other's skin or the other's fur, cleaning them. But there was one in particular that the Buddha had pointed out. There was one monkey on a stump there who had been badly burned, so there was really no fur left on this monkey. Its facial features were distorted and its ears were burned off. And then the Buddha had asked Sundarananda, he says, I know your wife or your lover Sundari is beautiful, but how does she compare to this monkey that you see over here? And Sundarananda quickly replies, going, "Oh, she is so much more beautiful than this creature here. This creature's ugly. This creature's so hard to look at. It's not something that I want to really even be around." And this made sense to the Buddha, and they eventually left those monkeys. They finished their hike and got back to the monastery. And just before he left, the Buddha had asked Sundarananda, "Have you ever seen heaven before? Have you ever been to one of the heavenly realms?" And Sundarananda replied, "No, I've never been there, but if you would like to bring me with you, I'll gladly go with you." And so the two of them had entered the meditation hall. They entered a deep state of samadhi, and they were in one of the heavenly realms there. And then within the heavenly realms, the Buddha shows his younger brother all the beings that lived there, all the heavenly gods and goddesses. And he said, "Look at these people here." And he then asked him, "I know that your lover Sundari is beautiful, but how does she compare to these goddesses in this heavenly realm?" To where Sundarananda says, "These beings are magnificent. If you ask me, my lover is more akin to that monkey that we saw compared to these beings. These are some of the most beautiful creatures I'd ever seen." And the Buddha had told him, if you're able to cultivate your practice and gain great merits, you will be reborn in this land. And you can take these goddesses as your own. You can take them as your lover. And this really motivated Sundarananda to where he accepted that promise. He said, "Okay, yes, I will cultivate the path." So as they got back into the earthly realm after leaving their samadhi, that's all he did. He was gaining merits wherever he could. He was gaining blessings wherever he could, and he was practicing, but for the sole motivation to be reborn in that heavenly realm. So you could say this is more of a give and take relationship. He was giving all this work to just reap a reward in the future. But then this word got out to a lot of the other monastics, and they kind of ridiculed him for this. They more called him a day laborer, in the sense that he was really only working for a reward. He wasn't cultivating the practice or cultivating the way and improving his practice for the right reasons. He was doing it more out of greed and for lust for these heavenly beings. But then this kind of hit Sundarananda pretty hard, and he was quite ashamed of himself after realizing, yeah, that's really the only reason why I'm practicing this way. So in his shame, he kind of secluded himself. And then in that seclusion, he kind of realized why he should be practicing the way. It wasn't for celestial bliss. It wasn't for to gain anything. The reason why you cultivate the way is to let go of stuff. It's to let go of clinging. It's to let go of desire. And eventually he realized that the bliss of nirvana really pales in comparison to what celestial bliss he had been promised. And upon this realization, then he attained the fruit of arhatship. And with that fruit of arhatship, he returned to the Buddha, and he had told him this. He said, Lord, about the Blessed Ones being my guarantor for getting heavenly goddesses, I hereby release the Blessed One from that promise. And this pleased the Buddha. He then replied, Sundarananda, having comprehended your awareness with my own awareness, I realize that Sundarananda, through the ending of affluence, has entered and remains in the affluent-free awareness realized and discernment release, directly knowing and realize that for himself in the here and the now. And this kind of goes to show that Sundarananda was attached to future rewards. He was looking for something in the future. He was always striving for some reward in the future, when really the happiness he was looking for wasn't in the future. It was in the here and now, like the Buddha had said. But it took him a lot of time to realize that nirvana isn't necessarily something you seek. It's already something that's here. It just requires you to see that for yourself. And as soon as he had realized that it wasn't something in the future, it was something he already had, he awoke. He was able to realize that and attain the fruit of arhatship. So that ends the story of Sundarananda. So now we'll go to Ananda, which is probably the most known of these Nandas. He was the attendant of the Buddha, but later in his life. He is the first cousin of the Buddha, as the Buddha's uncle's son. So the king's brother, this would be his son. Ananda itself means bliss, because Ananda was born on the same day that the Buddha became enlightened. The Buddha had entered this blissful state. Thus, this son was named Ananda, meaning bliss. So it's said that when the Buddha came home back to the palace after his enlightenment to see his father, he ran into Ananda. And just Ananda hearing the Buddha talk, he said, there's something about my cousin. I'd really love to know more from him. I really would like to follow him. And he had let his family know, I would wish to become ordained as a monk under the Buddha. But then also another first cousin of the Buddha was Devadatta, to where sometime before that, Devadatta had left to go ordain under the Buddha. So then Ananda's mother had heard this and said, no, I would prefer you not to. I've already had one son, the Putra's family. Most of Shariputra's family had left to become monastics, all his brothers and his sisters. So their mother was very, very reluctant to see her last son go off to be a monastic. But Ananda did not take this very well. He is, as a form of rebellion, he took a vow of silence, and he moved to a town called Vindeha, where while living in this town, he had earned the nickname the Silent Wise One from Vindeha. And he stayed there some time until his mother finally broke and said, if this is the life that you want to live, then who am I to keep you from living that life? And then with his mother's acceptance, he was able to leave. For the holy life. So then now, when Ananda became ordained by the Buddha, he had two prominent teachers as he first ordained. One of them was named Puna, and the other one was Shariputra himself. The first teacher, Puna, really introduced Ananda to the Dharma, and through his teachings, Ananda attained the first stage of enlightenment, which is the Sotapanna. And when his other teacher, Shariputra, what he had learned from Puna, Shariputra really refined his understanding. He taught him more of the finer points of the Dharma. He also developed this great relationship with Shariputra. He saw him more as a friend than also a teacher. But then Ananda started to teach some of the other younger monks what he had learned. But then during some of his talks, or in one talk in particular, there was a more enlightened arhat that sat in on a talk, and he quickly realized that Ananda didn't have the knowledge that he thought he did. He wasn't as realized as he thought he was. And he had told Ananda after that talk, he's like, I should give you the advice to let go of some of your attachments and work more closely on your meditative practice, because though you know some of the Dharma, I do not believe you have realized it for yourself. You need to work on that a little bit more. But as I'll soon get into, this wasn't necessarily something that Ananda took. This was something he just kind of heard and he didn't really apply it to his practice. Now, the Buddha had always had attendants, and especially in his older age, he needed an attendant to help take care of him a little more, because some of the other attendants he had, he wasn't necessarily satisfied with them because they weren't able to care for him the way that he needed the care. To where at the age of 55, the Buddha had announced that he needed a new attendant. And already at that time, many of the other arhats had offered to be an attendant. They voluntarily wanted to be, but the Buddha didn't accept any of them. And during this whole get-together, Ananda was very quiet during that. And some of the monks had asked him, well, why are you so silent to volunteer to be the Buddha's attendant? And Ananda had told them, I'm sure the Buddha knows who he wants to be the attendant. And with that, the Buddha had asked Ananda specifically, would you like to be my attendant? And though Ananda was flattered with this, he didn't accept right away. He had two conditions that he wanted the Buddha to uphold in order for him to be his attendant. First one that Ananda wanted, or Ananda's first condition, was that he did not want any material gain from being the Buddha's attendant. He did not want any food from the Buddha, he did not want any clothes, he didn't want any gifts, he didn't want anything that would obstruct his own practice. He also did not want to paint himself as someone with ulterior motives, or as someone who wanted to be the Buddha's attendant to gain something. He simply wanted to be the Buddha's attendant to just attend him. He wanted to attend the Buddha without any sort of reward. His second request is that he would like the Buddha to answer his questions. He would like one-on-one Dharma talks. He would also want the Buddha to clarify points he did not understand. And lastly, he would like the Buddha to repeat any of the teachings that he himself would miss because of attendant duties. And the Buddha had accepted all these. And the reason why Ananda had made these requests is because he felt that this was the true reward for being the Buddha's attendant. It wasn't any material gain. It wasn't to gain anything. It was more to receive the Dharma one-on-one from the Buddha. And then so as the attendant, Ananda took care of a lot of the Buddha's daily practical needs, such as delivering water when the Buddha needed, or cleaning his dwelling place, which is he would act as sort of a guarding at night times to make sure that no one disturbed the Buddha. He also acted as a sort of secretary for the Buddha, to where he would set up a lot of talks for lay people as they would come into the temple. He would also inform the Buddha about a lot of news, a lot of the invitations that the monastics had been invited to, and also a lot of the needs of the lay people. He also advised a lot of the lay people who wanted to give gifts to the Sangha. And he did most of this so the Buddha could focus on teaching, while Ananda did a lot of the footwork, making sure that the Buddha could teach. And with him being the attendant, he soon received these, what are called the 8 inconceivable states. The first state was that he never accepted special invitations. And by special invitation, it means like a one-on-one invitation, to where they only invited Ananda and no one else. And this was due to an event that had happened to Ananda. He did receive once a special invitation that's led him into trouble. He had received an invitation from a woman who was deeply infatuated with him. And upon entering her abode, she had casted this spell on him so that he could not leave. And as soon as he came in and entered into this trance, she immediately started to seduce Ananda. And this sort of alerted the Buddha that Ananda could break his vow of celibacy. So the Buddha had recited what was called the Shurangama mantra. And he told this to the Bodhisattva Manjushri. And after he had finished reciting this, he told Manjushri, please go find Ananda and recite this mantra for him. And then soon after that, Manjushri did find Ananda. As soon as he found him, he whispered this to him, this mantra. And immediately after hearing the mantra, Ananda awoke from this this spell-like trance and was able to leave before he could break his vow of celibacy. So then afterwards, Ananda took invitations, but he only did if it was with other monks with him. So he never traveled to any of these invitations alone. The second of his inconceivable states is that he never wore the Buddha's clothes. And as the Buddha started to get older and his clothes would wear out, he would retire his clothes. And monks would often fight over these clothes, believing that wearing these clothes, they would instill some of the Buddha's wisdom in there and help them along their own path. These monks were really just greedy, and they just wanted to say that they had some of the relics of the Buddha, which Ananda did not want any of this. He never had any desire to keep any of the Buddha's clothing for himself. The third of these inconceivable states is that he looked at what was supposed to be looked at, and he avoided what he should avoid. And this really just means is that he kept his mind guarded. He was able to recognize when something would spark an unwholesome thought, and he really kept those from arising. He was able to guard his mind from negative things and allow a lot of the positive things inside. This kind of leads into the fourth of his inconceivable states, is that he did not have any defiled thoughts arise. So because he was such a good guardian of his mind, those defiled thoughts and negative thoughts just never had a reason to rise. And this goes, there's an example that while he would enter samadhi and go to some of the heavenly realms with the Buddha, he would see all these beautiful people, just like we had learned from Sundarananda. Even he said that many of the heavenly beings were beautiful to look at, some of the best people you had ever seen. To where when Ananda saw them, he had no attachment or clinging to them. There was no attraction he felt for them. He just saw them as the beings they were. Had no sexual desire for them all. He just saw them. He had nothing cruel, nothing lustful, nothing malicious appear in his mind when he saw any of these beings. The fifth one, he knew which samadhi the Buddha had entered. And the reason for knowing this is he could tell the monks afterwards which samadhi the Buddha was in, and thus the monks could ask the Buddha what he had realized during these moments of samadhi. And this is thus how sutras are born. The monks will ask a question, and the Buddha would answer these in the form of a sutra. Number 6, he knew the benefits received by beings who were taught and transformed by the Buddha. Number 7, he was able to memorize and understand all the Dharma that the Buddha had spoke. So this goes into what many have heard is that Ananda having photographic memory. He only needed to hear things one time, and he knew everything word by word. If he was listening to a Dharma talk by the Buddha, he could recite every word of that talk word for word, which goes into his 8th inconceivable state. He only needed to have a talk or a Dharma talk told to him one time. He did not need it to be repeated twice. So it just goes to show that he had this great memory in order to preserve the Dharma, to preserve the teachings, which ultimately earned him the title, the treasurer of the Dharma, because he knew it backwards and forward, knew it inside and out. Whenever someone needed a recitation of the talk, Ananda was there to give the talk. Now, because Ananda was very much in touch with the needs of the community, he was aware that women at that time wanted to ordain under the Buddha. And they wanted to what we call bhikshunis, to where bhikshu means monk, bhikshuni means nun. And this kind of started when the Buddha's foster mother came to the temple he was staying at, along with 500 other women, and they wanted to give gifts and offerings to the Sangha there, and ultimately wanting to become nuns. And the Buddha initially, he rejected this offer, though he did think that all sentient beings can become enlightened, and he saw men and women as equal. He did not want the nuns to become part of that Sangha. But then he was soon persuaded by Ananda. Ananda had told him, you owe a great debt to your foster mother. She was there for you after your mother had died. She was there to raise you when no other mother was there. This is repaying the debt back to her. And ultimately, the Buddha accepted and was able to create the order of nuns. But it's not because he didn't respect the nuns. It's more because he did not want to have friction within the community. Because at that time, it was more of a patriarchal society to where women were more seen as just the householders. They weren't able to become priests. They weren't able to live this holy life. And though he believed that they could, he did not want to cause friction between his own monastics and the communities he was living in at the time. But ultimately, he did push forward, and he did make that order of nuns. And as the Buddha got older, Ananda needed to increasingly be more by his side. But then being by his side, he developed this big attachment for the Buddha as a person. And this closeness was kind of a detriment to his practice. He saw the Buddha as a person and not necessarily the teachings of the Buddha. To where at the end of his life, the Buddha had announced that he would die soon and he would enter nirvana. And this really hit Ananda hard because he had this deep clinging to the Buddha as a person. He did not take him dying very well. So then on the Buddha's deathbed, Ananda had asked him, who will become our new teacher? Who will lead us? Who will be the new teacher? While many believe that Mahakashyapa would have been the new teacher due to his superiority and his own knowledge of the Dharma, the Buddha announced that there would be no teacher. That he would want people to take refuge in the teachings. He would want people to take refuge in the Dharma, and ultimately he would want them to seek for the Buddha within themselves, not the Buddha on the outside. And in the Buddha's final sutra, the Mahaparinibbana Sutra, the Buddha exclaims, "Therefore, Ananda, dwell as a lamp unto yourself, refuge unto yourself, seeking no other refuge, with Dharma as your light, Dhamma as your refuge, seeking no other." The Buddha had explained that he had already taught everything that he knew. He had taught everything that one needed to reach the stage of an arhat, to reach the end with nirvana, to become enlightened. There was nothing more he needed to teach. But this kind of goes to show that the Buddha himself was a person. He was more as a mouthpiece for the Dharma, and it's not the person you want to attach to. It's not the person you want to follow. It's the teachings that really have the power. It's not to rely on an outside force. It's to take the teachings. Don't attach to the teacher, but attach to the teachings. Well, attach is the right word. You don't want to attach to the teachings, but you want to follow the teachings. And then at the age of 80, the Buddha died in samadhi meditation, and he was cremated by his monastic community. There was many monks and nuns there to bear witness, but Ananda was not one of them because of the reason that I said. He became too attached to the Buddha. And then shortly after the Buddha's death, 500 of the arhats had came together to form the first Buddhist council to preserve the teachings of the Buddha, to preserve the Dharma for future generations. And you would think that Ananda, with his great memory, he would be a great asset for this community. But he failed to meet one of the requirements to be within the council. And the one requirement was you must be an enlightened arhat. And you may have noticed in this that Ananda himself was not yet enlightened. This was mostly because he spent most of the time memorizing the sutras. He was memorizing what the Buddha had said and not really analyzing it for himself. He knew all the Dharma and he knew all the teachings word for word, but he hadn't realized them. He hadn't had it make sense to him just yet. And I guess I could say with the passing of the Buddha, he stopped looking at the Buddha and he started looking more to the teachings. to where after 25 years, he finally realized that he needed to analyze the teachings for himself. So in a deep state of samadhi meditation, the night before the first meeting of the Buddhist council, he sat there and he looked at the teachings. And instead of just knowing them, he finally realized what the teachings had meant, and he finally attained that fruit of arhatship. Thus, he was able to gain entry into the Buddhist council, and he was there to help preserve the teachings and keep them authentic in their original form for generations to come. So this is the story of the three Nandas, Nanda, and Sundarananda. If anyone has any questions, I can answer them for you, or Thích Quang can answer them for you if there are none. Okay, I see that there is no questions, so I will give it back to Thích Quang.
Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Thank you, Quang Hiển, for an enlightening talk on the three Nandas. There's a handful of other Nandas out there, but these are the three main Nandas. It's also good to mention that Sundarananda isn't actually technically mentioned in the Amitabha Sutra, but he is typically added to the commentary of the Amitabha Sutra. But he is mentioned as kind of an honorary mention, since he is one of the three Nandas, or enlightened Nandas during the Buddha's time. So he kind of gets an honorary mention, but he's not technically in the sutra. To be quite honest, I'm not exactly sure why not. I'm not unsure if he wasn't present during the time of the sutra was given, or if he was just forgotten about. But either way, the mentioning of him now at least gives us some further insight into the Nandas of the Buddha's time. The other mention I kind of want to bring up is Ananda and his cultivation of the Dharma. As Anagarika Quang mentioned, that Ananda was superior in his photographic memory, but because he emphasized too much on memorizing the Dharma and knowing the Dharma word for word as the Buddha instructed, he didn't give himself enough time, or didn't give himself any time, for that matter, to actually practice and put in the effort of what he's been memorizing. Now, this doesn't technically come as a surprise, because as his role as attendant, right, even in today's times when monastics have attendants aren't typically attendants for as long as Ananda was. Ananda was kind of an exception to that rule because he had photographic memory, so he was relied on to be the attendant of the Buddha and be close enough to be able to hear the Buddha as he's teaching the Dharma, so that he can know and understand, and in this case, memorize the Dharma. But in typical circumstances, when a monastic, or when a monk or nun is an attendant to their teacher, they're only an attendant usually for either their novice years as a monastic, as a monk or nun, or as a few years, typically no more than 5 after ordaining. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is, usually as an attendant, the monk or nun has a plethora of other duties other than just being part of or conducting services and ceremonies. Right? They have other duties and responsibilities to do, so they're oftentimes away from Dharma talks, they're often away from services of chanting or meditation. And because of that, they don't really have the time to study and practice. And so they kind of fall behind a little bit in their progression and the development. But it is actually one of the highest honors as any monastic to become an attendant, because you have the ability to be close to your teacher. You have the ability to have that one-on-one contact, to kind of have personal conversations with the teacher, and you have the opportunities for your teacher to teach you things that they typically wouldn't teach others or wouldn't teach publicly. And so it's a great honor to be selected as an attendant, knowing that you may be falling short just a bit on your kind of spiritual progression. But besides that, we can take the example of Ananda intellectually understanding the Dharma, but not really realizing that, right? And I mentioned that during my Dharma talks quite a bit, is it's one thing to be able to just intellectually understand the Dharma, right? We can sit down and say, yeah, I understand how impermanence works. I understand that everything's impermanent. I understand that in life there is suffering. I understand that I'm attached to the self and my ego, and I have all these likes and dislikes and comforts and whatnot. It's superficially, it's easy to comprehend that, but it's a whole other thing to truly recognize and realize the danger behind those beliefs, or the danger behind those kind of superficial understandings, right? And so most people are kind of in the role of Ananda, right? They sit, they study, they do some practicing, maybe you come to temple and you do the chanting and the classes and the services. And so you have a very intellectual understanding of the Dharma. You can speak of the Dharma. You can sit down and tell me what the Four Noble Truths are, or the Eightfold Path. You can maybe mentor someone on how to just do simple meditation, but you don't actually have that realization of that. And that's where our practice can potentially become actually pretty dangerous, right? It can become a roadblock, because I take the vow that I do not teach anything unless I have a full understanding or an actual realization. I've realized the truth behind the teaching, right? And so I encourage Quang to do the same thing, right? Do not teach, even having small conversations with people, right? When it comes to kind of grander topics, in a sense, right? If you're just kind of teaching one-on-one information and something simple to anybody, that's perfectly fine. But when it comes to some of the topics where has the power to enlighten, has the power to liberate, has the power to break down the defilements of the mind, that becomes a little bit more tricky, where you have to have that realization, you have to have that experience in order to recognize what is actually true. Because we can sit here and say in life there is suffering. You can sit here and say that everything's impermanent, but what does that actually mean? What does that actually imply? What does that actually do for you, right? Because if you don't have that realization, then you honestly have no place to speak. Because otherwise, someone else can just go on the internet and read the exact same thing you just proclaimed, right? So it makes no difference. There's no significance between someone who is unrealized telling you what impermanence is versus you reading it in a book or off the internet, right? There's no differentiation there. The differentiation comes when a realized being or a teacher can speak on something, and you know, just by the way they speak, by the way they talk about the topic or talk about their experience, you know that there's you know that they have that realization. You know that there's something behind those words that allows them to, or allows you to have some confidence in their teachings. So my point is really, it's just to don't assume just because you know something or you have the understanding of some specific topic of Dharma that you have the realization of it, right? We have to understand that there's a differentiation between the two. We have to know that to claim something that you have not yet attained is a grave sin, right? Quote unquote. One of the 4 unforgivable kind of sins for a monastic, the 4th one is to proclaim a realization that you have not attained, right? That in itself is enough of an offense to be defrocked, right? To be stripped of your titles as a monastic, to be stripped of your robes, to be kicked out of the monastery. That alone, that lie alone of proclaiming you have a realization when you truly do not, is enough to be kicked out. So if that's such a grave offense for a monastic, imagine what it does to you as a layperson or as a practitioner, as a vow taker, as an Anagarika, as a novice, right? You lose that confidence that people may have in you. And this goes beyond more than just being able to speak well, right? Because someone who's unrealized can speak very well on a topic and sound very convincing, right? And so it's important to kind of also be able to see through that in a way, if that makes any sense. But my overall point here is to acknowledge that we are all Anandas pre his enlightenment, that we all have an understanding of the Dharma, we have an understanding of the teachings, but we do not yet fully realize it. So we are unenlightened, right? We may be in the stage of first level of enlightenment, right, as Ananda was during the majority of his monastic career as a Sutapatthana. And that's something that we can all accomplish and have accomplished, but to go beyond that and to proclaim things you have, or to assume that you have a realization is a dangerous road to walk, a path to walk. Okay, I'm gonna stop there. So that's again, thank you to Quang for the Nanda's stories. I believe that we are halfway through the Arhats now, officially. Also do want to mention that I believe this is our last class for July. August. In August will be our last classes for both the Sutra class and the meditation class. So we have 2 more classes for both, I believe. Sorry, we have 1 more meditation class this month, and then 2 classes next month, and 2 classes for Sutra study next month as well. September, we're going to take kind of a break from all classes, both in the meditation and the Sutra study class. And then for October and November, we'll have meditation class, but it'll just be meditation in itself. So it'll be about 10-15 minutes of quick instruction at the beginning, and then we'll just sit for about 45 to 60 minutes, depending on how the introductions go. And then we'll continue with Sutra study class for October and November as well. And of course, in December, we'll have our break until after the Lunar New Year. So thank everyone for joining us and for listening to our Sutra instruction. I'll go ahead and transfer the merits. Please join me in invoking the Buddha's name 3 times. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha Buddha, Namo Shakyam Muni Buddha. For any positive karmic action we've accumulated here today, we wish to transfer the merit to all sentient beings and wish them full enlightenment. Namo Shakyam Muni.